Welcome to Sachs Realty's Tuesday Night Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything real estate. Each week, we deliver expert information enabling you to make better informed decisions while keeping more money in your pocket. If you're interested in real estate, this is your show. Housing is so closely affected by the U.S. economy. And what I mean by that is, in order to buy a house or to keep home values up, our economy must be strong. We must have good jobs. We must have good wages, low unemployment. And really, we need decent interest rates that we can borrow money. So the U.S. economy right now is really concerning a lot of people. And in this interview you're about to hear with Jackie Greene, she's an economist. Her and I, we kind of dive deep into some of the main issues that are affecting our economy right now. Right now, we're seeing rising interest rates, house prices that are through the roof. We're seeing turbulence in the stock market, and the Fed's raising rates, and that can be challenging to our economy and our jobs. So I hope you enjoy this interview that I'm having with economist Jackie Greene. Jackie, so good to see you.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We appreciate your time. We have so much to unpack.
It's a very busy economy out there.
It sure is. There's a lot of uncertainty. I know here locally in Maryland, we have a lot of questions being asked to us every single day, especially from our home buyers, home sellers too. Being in the real estate business, that's at the top of the Main Street media as well. But I do want to talk a little bit about the economy, and if you could just give everybody, a kind of a high-level overview of who you are and what you do.
Well, thank you. I'm Jackie Greene. I'm the Vice President of Economics here at ITR Economics. And what we do is we help provide some guidance about what's actually going on in the economy. There's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of headlines out there. And so we are providing insights and direction. We forecast the economy, and we try to help our clients really make it actionable, because it's really important to know what's going on. But unless you can actually do something that helps you succeed or make a profit out of it, it's just nice information.
You're an economist.
Yes.
And you chose this. You went to college for this, right? So
I did.
I was speaking with a friend of mine who has an MBA in business and finance, and we were just kind of talking the other day, and he said that everything that he learned in college is pretty much, this economy is defying, a lot of what he learned. You kind of find that to be true?
Yes, but for slightly different tweak on things. I would say, for one, at ITR Economics, what we do is proprietary. So it's nowhere near what you learn in school. We have a whole methodology, and that's how we've been doing it for the last 70 years so successfully. But the other part of it is, I got to tell you, back in school, I never thought I'd see a day where oil prices went negative, and that's happened in the last few years. So, some things they just don't prepare you for.
Well, I wish I would have known that, because I lost a lot of money in stocks because of, oil and exploration, things like that. So, the inflation is kind of off the chart.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know globally, how we compare to other economies. The Fed, everyone's saying right now, because of the dollar being so highly valued, we're not seeing it here at home, but I take that our economy is still doing, better than most in the world. But when we hear that the chairman of the Fed is telling us that we need to really pump the brakes on the economy, we've been sitting, I guess, at 6 and 8% year-over-year growth, and he's saying that we need to get to 2%. Can you kind of just tell us what that means? And, how by raising the interest rates, the Fed's raising the interest rates, which I understand, a little bit about the policy, the monetary policy, and why we went to zero to stimulate this economy through the pandemic. But, kind of by raising the rate now, and the chairman saying that we're hoping for a soft landing. What are we expecting by them raising rates?
Well, the raising of the rates is really to curb the inflation that is going on. The funny thing about it all is it's largely due to government action that we have such inflation going on anyway. So they're trying to correct something that they started. It's not totally government intervention that caused it, but it is a piece of it. All the stimulus spending that went on during the pandemic pumped a lot of money into the economy, and now it's trying to cool some of that spending back down. But part of that inflation is also coming from all the supply chain issues we've had. We have all these consumers who are in a good spot to continue spending, but they can't get the goods that they want, so that they are raising prices because of basic supply and demand. Those are a few of the pieces in there, but that's part of why the Federal Reserve is trying to raise those rates to cool down that inflation. I actually have a chart with me, if you want to look at it, about GDP and our forecast for it. And I'm a picture person. A picture's worth 1,000 words in my mind. All right, here we have GDP, and the darker blue section is actual results for GDP, and the forward lighter blue section is our forecast for GDP moving forward. What you're going to see there is that giant drop in 2020. That was when the economy ground to a halt due to the pandemic. But you can see we've been climbing steadily upward since then and actually surpassed the pre-COVID level for our economy. The last quarter, it was big headline news. We saw that little drop in GDP. It's kind of got a little sensationalized in the news because they take an annualized rate. So basically what the numbers in the news are doing is they're taking what happens in one quarter and extrapolating it for the entire year. So if we have a slightly bad quarter, they assume it's going to be bad for the whole year, which is not really how the world works and how our economy works. But looking at it, it was really only a 0.3% decline from 1Q from 4Q. But we have to put it in context that 4Q was abnormally strong, as well as this was just the preliminary numbers. We are getting the more updated data on May 26th, and there's a pretty good chance we'll see that number come in a little higher. Either way, our forecast is for overall growth for the next 3 years in GDP. We have strong consumer base. We have good fundamentals here in the US. We'll be in a good position. It's going to waffle a little bit as we go through 22 and into 23. That's kind of where you see some of that flat period in there. But overall, you're going to be seeing some growth. So that's where the Fed's coming in, trying to cool those interest rates. And it has the potential to cause a little bit more disruption in GDP simply because of how people feel, but not really enough to tank GDP by any means. And I really don't expect that what their actions are going to do is causing GDP decline in any real sense. The economy is too big for that to really be hampered by a slight change in interest rates. We feel it more and it makes great headlines and it's an emotional reaction, but interest rate changes to that degree aren't going to be enough to actually stall the economy.
So when you're looking at this type of growth with GDP, it looks very optimistic, right? I'm looking at it, I'm going, hey, that's great. It's nice to think that we're going to move forward from here and that we're not going to see any kind of major economic setbacks. I guess I'm kind of curious as to with this chart and the expectations of growth, how does it take foreign trade into this consideration? I guess, as compared to our domestic products versus imported products. And then, does this consider what we're seeing going on right now with the Ukraine situation and, the Russia-Ukraine war that's taken place?
So first part of that was the trade. And that's actually a large part of why we saw that slight decline in 1Q is because GDP looks at how much we're importing versus how much we're exporting. And the balance of that created some little bit of decline in the GDP numbers. So you're right. Our dollar is strong. We are importing a bunch and exporting quite a bit as well. So that there is that going on. The question about Ukraine, though, yes, we're looking at Ukraine. This forecast was put together pre-invasion of Ukraine, but we are watching it very closely. And that is one of the risks to the forecast. I will fully admit there are always risks to every forecast. We have a saying around here that every forecast is born to die. So we are very cautious with them each time, and we look at them very closely. But those risks from Ukraine are really stemming from if the situation escalates. If all of a sudden Russia is invading other countries, that's a risk to it. There's also the part, where it's creating some higher commodity prices. We see it at the pumps all the time with our oil prices, but other metals are going up. And part of that is because of supply and demand, and part of that is also because of fear. When there's an invasion and there's a threat of supply chain constraints and supply issues, there's a natural fear that occurs, and so prices go up as a reaction. And the last part of it is our forecast was built on the expectation that supply chain issues would ease as the year goes on. And depending on how things go with Ukraine, we could see that easing not nearly as much as we had been anticipating. So these are all risks we're watching out for. But overall, we're still very confident in this outlook, and we're watching it.
Are you surprised to see the U.S. dollar trading like it is right now? Really, we're at like the highest in 40 years, right? Or 50 years. I mean, is that accurate in saying as far as the value of the dollar through all of this madness?
I'm not going to say I'm surprised. The oil thing, like I said, that one really surprised me when oil prices went negative. But overall, this makes a lot of sense. Even with our interest rates going up, which is normally a reason you see the dollar come down, we still are a very safe place to be. So it's a flight to safety item right now. Frankly, it makes for some good buying opportunities, and I'm already booking some travel about my next trips going, all right, I'm going to pay for those right now before the interest rate changes, and I get the most bang for my buck that way.
So you're talking about out of the country travel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. Because, I wonder with the dollar going up the way that it is, I just wonder how much that will inhibit our growth here for manufacturing, things like that. Because, with the dollar being high, then it doesn't really make sense for us to make it when we can buy it from other countries. I really think, Jackie, and this is just kind of my personal opinion, but I hope that we would have learned more, honestly, from this pandemic and how our country was so crippled. And I don't know, I'm certainly not trying to buy into any kind of conspiracy theories or anything like that. So don't get me wrong, but I'm trusting that the pandemic is truly why we couldn't unload these ships that were sitting in the middle of the ocean, and why these products were being restricted. I want to have all the confidence in the world in that. But if we are depending so much on importing product, we really need to start manufacturing here in the USA. And it wasn't that long ago. I'm at an age where I can remember back in the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of product that was stamped made in the USA, and that was some good job creation that we did back then.
It is a very strong manufacturing industry here in the US, and I don't want to discount the strength of US manufacturing. And even in 2021, we saw thousands of companies reshoring into the US because of some of what you're talking about. It's to bolster their supply chains. But I also want to make sure that we don't get so far down that path that we are losing sight of the economics of there are benefits to manufacturing in multiple locations, depending on your consumer base. And you should always have multiple sources for things. So whether it's one domestic, one overseas, and one in Southeast Asia, you find your mix, but you should always have multiples so that you are well protected.
I can certainly appreciate that. I appreciate that comment. I guess what my concern is, and I know we have ramped up our manufacturing here. I see it on a commercial real estate level, especially with warehousing needs and things like that. I guess my question is more, when we see the dollar trading, so high right now, I guess that just concerns me, where I wonder how those companies may survive, if we have to continually, raise prices here in order to export even, right? What's the advantage of, other countries buying from us, and so that we can gain some of that revenue?
I agree. But the Economist me can't help but going, well, if we're not the best and the most efficient at it, maybe we're not the right person to be doing it. We have a lot of other jobs within the US that are not always manufacturing because we are so good at many things. So yes, manufacturing is very important and I fully support it, but I'm also recognizing we're bringing tech jobs back into the US. We're bringing other high needs jobs into the US as well. So I think we have plenty of opportunities for U.S. people to have good jobs in this country. And yes, the dollar is going to get strong, or is strong right now, excuse me. And that does put a little squeeze on manufacturing at this point in time, but I don't think that's going to be a long-term issue to the same extent, because the dollar will not stay quite as strong. But we got to stay competitive on a global landscape either way.
So let's talk about the Fed raising the rates. So I think that we're going to see that several times, maybe another 4 or 5. Who knows how many times this year? I think until they start to see the that rapid growth, they want to kind of slow it down a little bit, and the inflation. And I think of a lot of different things that come to mind that is a concern, because the Fed said, hey, we want to try and soft land this idea of bringing our inflation down to about a 2% annual growth over the next couple of years, I would imagine. And, with what has really been happening, everything, our financing really relies on what, the Fed is doing with the rate that we can borrow from them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Borrow money. We're seeing it in mortgages. So we saw, like a 0.5 point, just the anticipation of them doing it again and again and again. We're seeing mortgages shoot up to, just shy of 6%. And that's a lot of concern, because for people, that could mean a difference of paying 30% more for their mortgage. But it's also going to affect all borrowing, right? Credit card debt may be affected by it, other loans, car loans, things like that. So I think that it will affect, our economy, at least on the short term. I personally think that once they do it a couple times, maybe they'll bring it back down a little bit. Who knows? But what is your expectations? I mean, what do you think is going to happen? And more specifically to mortgage rates, because, not being selfish, but that, happens to be the business that I'm in, but also that is on the words of so many buyers, that have hoped to have ownership, home ownership, that have been waiting because they've been outbid by the cash and things like that. And they're kind of looking for a break. So the last thing they want to see is a extreme, hike in mortgage rates. So where do you think we'll be in the next 12 months with that?
I expect we'll see some rise in mortgage rates, and we're seeing that in bond prices already, and some of those trends move very similarly to each other. So I'm feeling very confident we'll see some of that rise. But before everyone gets scared about that, I have a chart I'd like to share with you, if we can. I think it'll help put some of that in a little bit more at ease, if we shall say. So we do expect those rates to go up, but I want to put it in context. So this chart here shows that when we're adjusting for inflation, we actually have 30-year mortgage rates at a negative rate. Why that's important and how that works is, remember, even though rates are going up, wages have been going up. We've seen a lot of price wages going up, so that you've got to put in context of what you can afford for a mortgage. So yes, it is more painful when you're looking at just what you're paying on the mortgage side, but when you look at what you're taking home also, it makes that a lot easier. What I also really like about this chart is it shows that even when mortgage rates go up, and this is on that adjusted for inflation basis, so real rise in mortgage rates, it doesn't really sink home prices. We saw that decline in home prices back in the 2008-2009 recession, but the circled area here is showing that even in a period of a couple of years of real rise in mortgage rates, those housing prices continue to climb. So what you can continue to expect is that it's not going to drop the housing market. These rising interest rates, we're still going to see home buyers out there. We have a lot of people who need homes, who want homes, who are entering the market, who are getting ready for that first home. What you might see, though, is a change in what they're buying, in that as people are going into the market, they might have to be buying something that's not necessarily their dream home as the first home. They're having to do more traditional starter homes, but they will still be able to buy.
Jackie, and I hear you. We are seeing wage growth, and we're seeing it with our buyers, where they're making more money, and again, I mean, look at things, and I'm not trying to be a cynic. I mean, I try and be an optimist and hope for the best and things like that. But being in business for 33 years as a business person, I've watched business owners, need to pay high fees to recruit people away from other companies. In the construction business, I've never seen construction workers making the kind of money that they are right now because of the labor crunch. And do you think that, when we talk about the jobs and we talk about all of the increases, and if you're listening to this, you may say, hey, I'm not seeing it. These increases, or you may have gotten a raise and said, hey, this isn't still helping me because I still can't afford to pay for my groceries and my rent, let alone tries to save a couple dollars to buy a house. But I guess when I think about, what the Fed said, the most disturbing part that I heard, and it's just the way it is, because it could be true, is that he said we were about 11 or 13 million jobs short in the US, and maybe 4 or 6 million people, I think, looking for jobs, and 13 million jobs, 11 or 13 million jobs to fill. And he said, by slowing down the economy, we're going to reduce the number of jobs required. And I'm thinking to myself, I know so many local businesses that need help. I was in a grocery store the other day. The fruit was moldy. And, and I said to the cashier, I'm like, man, I had a hard time picking out the fruit because it was moldy. She said, yeah, we have no one working in the produce department. So I'm thinking, this is just a local grocery store. When I see the Fed saying, hey, we're going to eliminate the need for these extra jobs, what are we saying to these small businesses? We're going to slow you down so that you don't need a produce person? I mean, how are we creating these jobs and, so that people can continue to pay their mortgages? How are we going to see the job growth continue and the salaries continue when we're telling these companies that we're going to slow down things, if you will? I mean, your GDP charts don't show that that there will be any decline. I mean, do you really think we're going to knock these jobs needed off, raising interest rates, and not create job losses by some of these local businesses?
Short answer is I don't expect that the Fed is going to be causing us to need to reduce jobs, short of them putting us into a full-blown recession. I mean, that would be the way that we would need to shed jobs.
But that is what they said. They said they specifically said we are going to reduce the number of jobs needed. We're going to take this 11 million or whatever it was, 11 or 13 million. We're going to reduce it so that we don't need these jobs. And to me, I'm thinking, a lot of these businesses coming off the pandemic, they're looking for people. What jobs are we reducing if we eliminate some of those jobs?
So what I'm seeing is that the jobs that we would be reducing during this time period aren't really the ones that are in high need now anyway. So you're right. We're trying desperately to fill so many positions. Right now, it's about, for every job opening, there's a half a person available to work who's not already employed somewhere. So we have a real need. So the economy is not going to be slowing down far enough to really cause us to get to the point where we have an excess of potential employees again. What we will see, though, where we could see some of that shedding, is the industries that were thriving during the pandemic because of the pandemic. And now that we're out of the pandemic, those industries are naturally contracting anyway. So I'm going to use like the Peloton as the example. In this sort of situation, everyone was buying Pelotons because they were at home and they were exercising. But now that they're able to get out of their homes and be more social again, actually go do stuff, there's less demand for those Pelotons because you can go actively actually bike with your friends in the neighborhood instead of only virtually. So that's one of those industries where the pandemic shift away from the pandemic might cause some job shedding, but not necessarily a full-blown economic swing in that direction.
Yeah. And I just think about all those people that were recruited because they needed those Peloton jobs. So they were paying these people a lot more money than what they necessarily would have if they didn't see the explosive growth. And I guess my concern is that these people went out and incurred debt maybe revolving debt or some kind of debt, bought a house or whatever based on the need for those types of, salaries, and just to kind of segue on that, and I don't want to get off track, but just to kind of segue off of that, I remember when the pandemic initially hit, I had a lot of friends of mine that lost their jobs, and they were decent paying jobs. Were paying their mortgages with these jobs, and actually it threw them into forbearance. And, a lot of those are still suffering today because, they were making jobs that where they could not get hired again, for those types of jobs, making that kind of money. And I guess watching how fast it happened, and everything today with the Internet of Things seems to happen so much faster than it did before, back in the 70s, when we had to rely on Pony Express to get our news. So I think that, one of the things that I always have said out of ignorance, Jackie, because I'm not an economist, but I always say, hey, there's really no real thing called a recession. That it's almost like we're either talked into it or talked out of it. So the Main Street media either comes and says, hey, things are terrible. They're going to be, hold on to your hat. And all of a sudden everybody stops spending money. And then all of a sudden it dips. Or they go, hey, guess what? The recession's over. Like we're coming out of it. And, and I know that there are people like you who, work very hard to, predict and give information and things like that. How much of the media power, the power of the media, does the Fed manipulate to talk us in and out of these things? And do you think that that is a valid assessment at all?
I don't know. That's a very tricky sort of thought process there of how much it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What I can tell you from my experience is working with our clients and plenty of other people at this point is it's easy to straight line think. It's those projections and just get in that mindset of, well, I'm in a recession, I'll never get out of a recession. Or on the flip side of it, going, business is great, it will always be great, it will never come back down. Part of what we have to do all the time is say, no, really watch your leading indicators, watch your own business cycle, because it will tell you you are turning so that you can be better prepared for that next recession. There are plenty of times I'm trying to remember exactly where, I apologize, but a few months ago, I was talking with someone else who was saying, then the recession, the COVID hit and put us into recession. And I had to actually find a polite way to say, actually, the recession started before COVID hit, but it wasn't as mainstream news. And COVID made it a lot worse. But based on the data, it actually began before COVID became that shutdown factor. I should be careful of how I say COVID hit, but before the US shut down because of COVID. So it's watching the data makes a big difference, being able to spot those things coming. We get so caught up in our day-to-day. If you think about the boiling pot principle with a frog in it, you have that frog in it, and if you slowly heat up the water, the frog doesn't even notice when they're boiling. Whereas if you throw them into a boiling pot, they're going to jump right out. Sometimes the economy is very much like that, where we're just trending along and you don't realize things are shifting. So that's part of what we do, is we help people see the shift.
Well, all great information. If we had to close by giving your prediction, putting your best foot forward, you think we have better days ahead?
I do. Partially because I'm a very firm believer that you can always find a way to be profitable. Even in a downtime, even recessions, you can be profitable because remember, your recession is generally talking about your top line. If you're protecting your margins, you can find a way to be profitable. In the housing market, go for it. I mean, it is going to still be rising prices for the big picture up until the next consumer-led recession. This weakness right now is not a consumer-led recession. We do see another one forming later this decade, but for now, you're good to go.
Keep buying.
Yeah, keep buying.
Well, Jackie, we really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
All right. We will talk to you soon.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
So guys, the economy, it's uncertain, right? So we have no way of knowing for sure what's going to happen. We're all on the sidelines, all in this together. as you could probably imagine, I don't agree with everything that Jackie has said, but I don't know the answers, and I'm just one of those opinions. So, guys, all of Jackie's information is in the show notes. She also has prepared additional slides that I think will be very helpful to you if you're interested in seeing where she thinks things are going. If you like this interview, you can let Jackie and I know by hitting the thumbs up. And I always appreciate it. If you want more content from me and Sachs Realty, you can subscribe to our channel, hit the alert bell. You'll be updated every time we post. See you soon.